My name is Jake. That's my first name, obviously. I can't tell you my last. The controllers are everywhere. Everywhere. And if they knew my full name, they could find me and my friends, and then, well, let's just say I don't want them to find me. What they do to the people who resist them is too horrible to think about. I won't even tell you where I live. You'll just have to trust me that it's a real place, a real town. It may even be your town. I'm writing this all down so that more people will learn the truth. Maybe then, somehow, the human race can survive until the Andalites return and rescue us, as they promised they would. Maybe. Welcome back, guys, to the My 2 Cents series, where I give, for the most part, my unresearched, unscripted opinion, my 2 cents, on a topic. Though to call this particular video unresearched would be a bit of a misnomer, as there are few franchises that I know more about than Animorphs. For those who don't know, Animorphs was a book series through Scholastic Publications, written by K.A. Applegate with assistance from her husband and several ghostwriters. It was distributed pretty widely back in the 90s. A lot of people have heard about it, though it always seems whenever I talk about it that an equal number of people haven't, so I'm not going to behave as if I expect you guys to know what this is. I'm going to give a brief description of it so that those of you who don't know what I'm talking about can keep up. Animorphs is a book series for kids, young kids, like elementary to middle school age kids. And I was first introduced to it through the Scholastic Book Club, which was distributed to schools in my area. It was a little leaflet, pamphlet type of thing where it would list out a bunch of different books available for purchase, show off some of the covers, and give brief descriptors of what the books were about. You would take them home, tear off the order sheet on the back, mark whichever books you wanted, and include enough money to purchase them, bring it back to your school, and your teacher would send them away, and then in a week or so, you'd get the book in the mail. It was a lot of fun, because it actually felt like I had some control of what I was consuming media-wise for probably the first time in my life. Though I didn't get an allowance when I was a kid, so I had to rely on my parents to buy the books for me, and they weren't always willing to do that. That's why, as a kid, I didn't actually read through this entire series. There were whole books that I missed. It wasn't until later that I went back and started collecting them and reading all of them. Still, I had a ton of fun with this series when I was younger. In fact, this is the series of books that got me interested in literature, got me interested in writing, got me interested in media. I credit these books with inspiring me to be critical of things and to create in general. So, in a sort of indirect way, these books are responsible for me creating this channel. Animorphs was the story of 5 kids. Jake, the leader, Tobias, the loner, Rachel, the warrior, Marco, the clown, and Cassie, the peacemaker. It's a science fiction story in which these 5 kids are gifted a power by an alien visitor, an Andalite named Alfangor, that allows them to transform into any animal that they touch. They're later joined by an alien, Alfangor's brother Axe, and must fight a sort of guerrilla war against a group of alien invaders who are invading the planet in secret, called the Yerkes. It sounds kind of like a science fiction superhero kind of story, doesn't it? But even though the science in these books wasn't consistent with actual science, it was pretty consistent with itself. There were rules to everything. Morphing technology, for example, uses the DNA of the animal to transform a person. It's not some form of magic. And it's not limitless. You can't go from one animal morph to another. You have to return to your human form first. And with a few exceptions, you can't combine traits of animals either. You are stuck with the abilities of the animal that you choose until such a time that you're able to revert to your human form and choose something else. The process of morphing also takes several minutes to complete. And if you remain morphed for more than 2 hours, you can never return to your human form. You are stuck that way forever. But the Yerkes have limits and rules imposed upon them as well. They are committed to this secret invasion, so they can't do anything too flashy. The main ability of the Yerkes is that they can possess people. They can take over people's bodies and even recall that person's memories, and so can create a perfect facade of being that person. The Yerkes are small parasitic creatures, like slugs. They can spread themselves out over an alien's brain and take full control of that alien. But even then, the process isn't flawless. Their ability to blend in is dependent on their ability to act like someone else. And Yerkes cannot survive for a long period of time without exposure to a certain type of radiation. The radiation native to the star of their home solar system, the star Kandrona. The radiation itself is called Kandrona rays, and even though they've learned to make these rays artificially, the technology to do so is rare and expensive. So one of the first things they'll do when they start to conquer a planet is find a large open area, or if they can't find a large open area, make one, in which to create an artificial Yerke pool, simulating the conditions on their home planet so that they can return there periodically and feed on Kandrona rays. This is when they're most vulnerable, as they have to leave their hosts in order to do so. And for the most part, these rules are strictly adhered to throughout the series, and used and reused in interesting ways to present new scenarios. Many times, the Animorphs have to find their way into the Yerke pool in order to exploit some vulnerability in their enemy. And likewise, on multiple occasions, the Yerkes, who have an understanding of how morphing technology work, try to use the 2-hour limit against the Animorphs. Or they will put pressure on them, not allowing them time to go and change their animal form. The Yerkes, even though their forces are larger and more powerful and more numerous, because they have to adhere to strict rules of engagement imposed by their own leadership, end up playing a sort of game of cat and mouse with these 6 kids. It is really the only reason that these kids managed to make any progress in the fight against them in the first place. The thing that really interested me in Animorphs, though, was Applegate's ability to put you inside the mind of the animal. When someone morphs into an animal using the morphing technology, their mind ends up sort of sharing a space with the mind of that animal. The morphing technology preserves their consciousness, but it is more or less running off of the brain of that animal with all of its instincts. They're also forced to see and experience the world through the senses of that creature. So while there were times that were kind of frustrating where they were forced to experience the world through the eyes of an insect, for example, which was still cool, don't get me wrong, it just wasn't cool in the same way as some of the other stuff. There were also times when they got to fight as big cats or wolves or fly through the air as birds of prey. And the description in these sections of the book are so great that I can't even do them justice. But most of the time, it is immersive enough that you feel like you're there too, that you're doing so too. How could you possibly experience what another creature would? What another creature only can? These books, they kind of make that possible, and I really appreciate them for that. This is a long series of books. There's 54 of them, I believe, with several ancillary companion books that delve deeper into the history and lore of this universe, as well as a couple of choose-your-own-adventure books, which aren't terrible. And even some books called Megamorphs. If the individual regular books are TV episodes, the Megamorphs are the TV movies that kind of round it out each season. Those companion books and the Megamorphs, they feel more like actual novels, whereas the individual Animorphs books, they don't. They're very short and easily digestible. If you've never read Animorphs, but you have read something along the lines of Goosebumps, they're pretty similar to that in terms of their reading level and how long it would typically take a person to get through them. Back when I was in school, I used to take them to school with me to read over lunchtime and during breaks between classes, and I would have to take 2 or 3 of them with me because I knew if I didn't, I'd get finished well before the day was over. Nowadays, I can read one of these books in less than an hour, and I'd be willing to bet that you probably could too. They're a little dated at this point. For example, nobody uses cell phones in them because cell phones weren't really a thing when they were being written. And there's a lot of pop culture references that are very of the times. A few of the books were slightly altered relatively recently to sort of do away with some of the datedness of them. But as far as I know, that didn't actually continue beyond like the first 8 books or something. But I still definitely think they're worth a read even today, even if there are some cringier moments in them. I guess it'll really come down to how much you dislike dated references, whether or not it'll bother you. At the end of the day, though, the books are fun and funny, and the characters are beautifully realized. There's a whole lot of filler books. Maybe I'll do a companion to this video where I go through and point out what all the filler books are, but even most of the filler books have something good in them. Like there's one where they turn into cows that you probably shouldn't read. You probably don't need to read that one. And you'll know from the cover. The cover always shows the point of view character of the book turning into the main animal of the book. But otherwise, I think the series is really good. It rounds out to be really good. And I'd even go so far as to say that some books are great. The ending, while it pissed me off, and it still does to this day, is really great. It's really super well written. And does a really good job of bringing all of the themes that were sort of there in the background of the entire series all together and wrapping them up. I don't think that I could actually make an Animorphs video without talking about the Nickelodeon Animorphs TV series and how much of an abject failure it was. As soon as the books proved to be popular, Nickelodeon decided they wanted the rights to a TV show for the series. The issue is they didn't really have the budget or the special effects technology to realize a lot of the locations and a lot of the transformations in the series. So in the TV show, morphs ended up being simple morph transitions. A lot of the more exotic locations became just the woods or a factory, and alien characters were rarely, if ever, shown on screen. The main villain of the books, Visser III, who himself was a Yerke in the body of an Andalite, was almost always seen in his human morph, which he only used in the books a handful of times. It wasn't a bad show due to any kind of laziness or incompetence. Everybody who worked on it did their best with what they had. But it cannot be denied that even though I have some nostalgia for the show, it was very disappointing. And Nickelodeon did eventually cancel it. I think when they started to realize just how dark this series was going to get. I mentioned that this story may sound like a science fiction superhero adventure, but that it isn't strictly that, in part because it follows strict in-universe rules. There is a strict in-universe realism to this story, and as the series progresses, it becomes plainer and plainer that that sense of realism is very important to the author. She is trying to tell a very specific kind of story. Animorphs, at the end of the day, becomes a cautionary tale against war, as well as a statement that sometimes war is necessary. It portrays characters with realistic PTSD, depression, anxiety, and a whole host of other things, and it progresses those things realistically, giving us some instances of the characters coping with and even overcoming those things, and some instances where they just can't. There are instances of torture in the series, instances of abuse, and every single character is changed in some way by the conflict that they're forced to take part in. Don't get me wrong, it's still fun to read the books, it's still fun to experience the things that these characters are experiencing. It's just, when you look back on it later, after the end of the series rolls around and makes it clear what the story was actually about, that you start to really see these things. You start to really see how terrifying these situations must have been. And suddenly it makes sense to you why the characters don't seem to be having as much fun as you are. By the end, everyone is a different person. Take Rachel, the character who I described as the warrior. She's the cousin to Jake, the leader of the group, and she starts out the series as sort of a stereotypical fashionista valley girl who has just a bit of a thrill-seeking side. Jake, when he starts to realize just how dire the situation is, just how small the group's chances of winning this war actually are, takes advantage of Rachel's thrill-seeking side and uses that. He turns her into the warrior, into someone who finds real thrill in battle, and who by the end of the series can't imagine life without fighting. He does that to his own cousin. He transforms her forever, because he knew that if he didn't, they wouldn't stand a chance. Everyone to their own extent has their own motivations. The group is not always cohesive. Sometimes they're at odds with each other in very real ways. But despite all this, I'd say you could still give this series to a kid. As a kid, I absolutely loved it, because a lot of these deeper, darker, scarier themes didn't really occur to me at the time. Animorphs is in some ways kind of like the show Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's perfectly fine for kids to watch because you've got clear heroes and clear villains. It isn't until those kids grow up that they look back and realize that those villains weren't just bad guys. They were fascists, and what all of the implications of that actually are. If you're someone who hasn't read Animorphs, even if you're older, even if these books are well below your reading level at this point, I would still absolutely recommend that you read them. They're a little hard to find nowadays, though I do think that some of them are available through Kindle, but if you can, you definitely should. This is a series worth reading. I said earlier that this series shaped the person that I am today, and I absolutely meant that. The Animorphs series, in fact, is my all-time favorite book series, even above the likes of something like Harry Potter, for example. I just love these books that much. I'm lucky enough to have been able to go back and collect all of the physical copies, and I do go back and reread them occasionally, even today. I guess one of the main points of me making this video is that I kind of want to bring these books to you guys. I want to bring awareness of the series to people who just aren't aware of it, because I am that confident that if you like the kind of stuff that I like and that I talk about on this channel, you'll like these books too. So that's just been my 2 cents on this topic. If you guys have read Animorphs, or even if you've just seen the TV show and haven't read the books, what do you think of the series overall? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or alternatively over in the My 2 Cents section of my new Discord server. There will be a link to that in the description down below. Either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.